Hello guys, today is February 29th. Let's continue our next episode of reading Pinocchio book series. Let's begin. Chapter 15. The assassins hang Pinocchio to the big oak. At this sight, the puppet's courage failed him, and he was on the point of throwing himself on the ground and giving himself over for lost. Turning, however, his eyes in every direction, he saw at some distance a small house as white as snow. If only I have the breath to reach the house, he said to himself, perhaps I should be saved. And, without delaying an instant, he recommenced running for his life through the wood, and the assassins after him. At last, after a desperate race of nearly 2 hours, he arrived quite breathless at the door of the house, and knocked. No one answered. He knocked again with great violence, for he heard the sound of steps approaching him and the heavy panting of his persecutors. The same silence. Seeing that the knocking was useless, he began in desperation to kick and pommel the door with all his might. The window then opened and a beautiful child appeared at it. He, she had blue hair and a face as white as a waxen image. Her eyes were closed, and her hands were crossed on her breast. Without moving her lips in the least, she said, in a voice that seemed to come from the other world, in this house there is no one. They're all dead. Then at least open the door for me yourself, shouted Pinocchio, crying and imploring. I'm dead also. Dead? Dead? Then what are you doing there at the window? I am waiting for the bear to come to carry me away. Having said this, she immediately disappeared, and the window was closed again without the slightest noise. Oh, beautiful child with blue hair, cried Pinocchio, open the door, for pity's sake. Have compassion on a poor boy pursued by assassins. But he could not finish the word, for he felt himself seized by the collar, and the same two horrible voices said to him threateningly, you shall not escape from us again. The puppet, seeing death staring him in the face, was taken with such a violence, feet trembling, that the joints of his wooden legs began to creak, and the sovereigns hidden under his tongue to clink. Now then, demanded the assassins, will you open your mouth, yes or no? Ah, no answer. Leave it to us. This time we will force you to open it. And, drawing out two long, horrid knives as sharp as razors, clash! They attempted to stab him twice, but the puppet, luckily for him, was made of very hard wood. The knives therefore broke into 1,000 pieces, and the assassins were left with the handles in their hands, staring at each other. I see what we must do, said one of them. He must be hung. Let us hang him. Let us hang him, repeated the other. Without loss of time, they tied his arms behind him, passed a running noose round his throat, and hung him to the branch of the tree called the big oak. They then sat down on the grass and waited for his last struggle. But at the end of 3 hours, the puppet's eyes were still open, his mouth closed, and he was kicking more than ever. Losing patience, they turned to Pinocchio and said in a bantering tone, goodbye till tomorrow. Let us hope that when we return, you will be polite enough to allow yourself to be found quite dead, and with your mouth wide open. And they walked off. In the meantime, a tempestuous northerly wind began to blow and roar angrily, and it beat the poor puppet from side to side, making him swing violently, like the clatter of a bell ringing for a wedding. And the swinging gave him atrocious spasms, and the running nose, becoming still tighter around his throat, took away his breath. Little by little his eyes began to grow dim, but although he felt that the death was near, he still continued to hope that some charitable person would come to his assistance before it was too late. But then, after waiting and waiting, he found that no one came, absolutely no one. Then he remembers his poor father, and, thinking he was dying, he stammered out, "Oh, Papa, Papa, if only you were here!" His breath failed him, and he could say no more. He shut his eyes, opened his mouth, stretched his legs, gave a long shudder, and hung his teeth insensible. Four rabbits as black as ink entered carrying a little beer. Chapter 16. The beautiful child rescues the puppet. While poor Pinocchio, suspended to a branch of the big oak, was apparently more dead than alive, the beautiful child with blue hair came again to the window. When she saw the unhappy puppet hanging by his throat and dancing up and down in the gusts of the north wind, she was moved by compassion. Striking her hands together, she gave three little claps. At the signal, there came a sound of sweep of wings flying rapidly, and a large falcon flew on the window sill. "What are your orders, gracious fairy?" he asked, inclining his beak in sign of reverence. "Do you see the puppet? Do you see the puppet dangling from a branch of the big oak?" "I see him." "Very well. Fly there at once. With your strong beak, break the knot that keeps him suspended in the air, and lay him gently on the grass at the foot of the tree." The falcon flew away, and after 2 minutes he returned, saying, "I have done as you commanded." "And how did you find him?" To see him he ap- to, s- to see him he appeared dead, but he cannot really be quite dead, for I had no sooner loosened the rude nose that tightened his throat than, giving a sigh, he muttered in a faint voice, "Ah, now I feel better." The fairy then struck her hands together twice, and a magnificent poodle appeared, walking upright on his hind legs exactly as if he had been a man. He was in the full dress livery of a coachman. On his head he had a three-cornered cap braided with gold. His curly white wig came down onto his shoulders. He had a chocolate-colored waistcoat with diamond buttons, and two large pockets to contain the bones that his mistress gave him at dinner. He had, besides, a pair of short crimson velvet breeches, silk stockings, cut-down shoes, and hanging behind him a species of umbrella case made of blue satin, to put his tail into when the weather was rainy. "Be quick, Medoro, like a good dog," said the fairy to the poodle. "Have the most beautiful carriage in my coach house harnessed, and take the road to the wood. When you come to the big oak, you'll find a poor puppet stretched on the grass half dead. Pick him up gently, and lay him flat on the cushions of the carriage, and bring him here to me. Do you understand?" The poodle, the poodle, to show that he had understood, shook the case of blue satin 3 or 4 times, and ran off like a race horse. Shortly afterwards, a beautiful little carriage came out of a coach house. The cushions were stuffed with canary feathers, and it was lined on the inside with whipped cream, custard, and vanilla wafers. The little carriage was drawn by 100 pairs of white mice, and the poodle, sitting on the coach box, cracked his whip from the side to side like a driver when he is afraid that he is behind time. Scarcely had a quarter of an hour passed when the carriage returned. The fairy, who was waiting at the door of the house, took the poor puppet in her arms and carried him into a little room that was wainscoted with the mother of the pearl. She, was- she sent at once She sent at once to summon the most famous doctors in the neighborhood. They came immediately, one after the other, namely a crow, an owl, and a talking cricket. "I wish to know from you, gentlemen," said the fairy, "if this unfortunate puppet is alive or dead." At this request, the crow, advancing first, felt Pinocchio's pulse. He then felt his nose and the little toe of his foot, and, having done this carefully, he pronounced solemnly the following words: "To my belief, the puppet is already quite dead." But if unfortunately he should not be dead, then it would be a sign that he is still alive. I regret, said the owl, to be obliged to contradict the crow, my illustrious friend and colleague, but in my opinion, the puppet is still alive. But if unfortunately he should not be alive, then it would be a sign that he is dead indeed. And you, have you nothing to say? Asked the fairy to the talking cricket. In my opinion, the wisest thing a prudent doctor can do when he does not know what he is talking about is to be silent. For the rest, the puppet there has a face that is not new to me. I have known him for some time. Pinocchio, who up to that moment had lain immovable, like a real piece of wood, was seized with a fit of convulsive trembling that shook the whole bed. The puppet there, continued the talking cricket, is a confirmed rogue. Pinocchio opened his eyes, but shut them again immediately. He's a ragamuffin, a do-nothing, a vagabond. Pinocchio hid his face beneath the clothes. The puppet there is a disobedient son who will make his poor father die of a broken heart. At that instant, a suffocated sound of sobs and crying was heard in the room. Imagine everybody's astonishment when, having raised the sheets a little, it was discovered that the sounds came from Pinocchio. When a dead person cries, it is a sign that he is on the road to get well, said the crow solemnly. I grieve to contradict my illustrious friend and colleague, added the owl. But for me, when the dead person cries, it is a sign that he is sorry to die. And that, my friends, is the strangest end of chapter. That is the end of this episode of Pinocchio reading series. Until next one.